So good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming this evening. It's a great pleasure to welcome Mark Chahwan, my boss, I guess. Mark is the CEO, founder of Sarwa, the first robo-advisor and first digital investment platform in the Middle East. I've known Mark for, I guess, almost 5 years now. Got involved in the project pretty early on. You guys have had an opportunity to read some background information on Sarwa and some information on Mark and opportunities in the region. So I won't delve too much into this. And I guess as usual, I'll give Mark the opportunity to talk about his background. And after we've kind of covered that background, we'll start doing a bit of a back and forth fireside chat, kind of talking about the Sarwa story. But thank you so much, Mark. By the way, Mark flew in from Dubai for this event tonight, which is really a wonderful opportunity for us. So thank you so much, Mark.
Pleasure.
And yeah, tell us a bit about yourself and the Sarwa origin.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for a great turnout, and really excited about this session. I know maybe other speakers have said this, but it's very trippy to be on this side of the room. So, and very good to see all of you. So, what I'm really hoping out of today is that you leave this class with some excitement, drive to go into VC, go into startups, and just pierce into that really beautiful industry where you can learn a lot, make an impact, challenge yourself, as it's something that I felt at Bronfman is increasing now. It's becoming more popular, but wasn't as accessible to students and to us when at least when I was a student. So and the best part of today is going to be your questions. So build up your courage for whatever's on your mind, to whatever is going, whether it's Sarwa related, career related. I'd love to try to give you my perspective on it. So I studied finance at McGill. I did a micro or a minor in entrepreneurship. So it was already something that was already in the making. Unfortunately, I didn't have Jiro's class. I wish I took it, but I heard really good things. And I did a few internships in finance. I found it a bit too corporate for me initially. I found it, very focused on institutions. So I tried, when I asked around, okay, what is a good career for me to learn how to solve general problems? I knew I wanted to start a business at some point, but I wanted something a bit generalist, and consulting seemed to be the popular thing around the block. It was very competitive, and I ended up joining Accenture. And at this point, I started working on different projects. I liked banking in general as an industry. So started to work with banks, flying to Toronto for some digital transformation projects, helping them, be less focused on branches, more on building mobile apps. And I did that for a few years, and eventually I realized that doing just advisory work isn't going to do it for me. I realized I needed to build something. I was itching to create something in technology, and so I saw this framework that I really liked, which is do something that you're good at, that the world needs, and that you love. And sort of that intersection of these three is where the magic happens. So the first thing that came to mind was actually an app that I was using called Wealthsimple in Canada. And I was like, it's simple, that's good, there's some design in it. And then I was like, okay, in terms of my identity, I'm Lebanese, I'm originally from the Middle East. Started thinking about my friends back home, and they're like really not saving, not investing. The banks there are really not doing their fair job at trying to help people to save and invest. And this is at this point I was like, I wonder, let me call Wealthsimple, let me try to sign up, see if they have any plans to maybe go to Dubai. And at that point, they're like, no, there's no way we're going to Dubai. We're barely going to the US, actually, so good luck solving that problem. So it was a bit disappointing at first, because I was like, there's no way I'm going to launch something. I never have an experience doing that. But the idea was like, let's see how far this thing can go. Let's explore this idea, see if I can see if I can make progress on a mission to build a robo-advisor. And this is where I started talking to Jad, my co-founder, who was at a hedge fund, and a best friend. And he really liked the idea. So I was like, okay, something was born, because it went from a story of 1 to 2, and in a very fragile early stage of a startup, it just takes one person that you believe is credible to really take it and make it something much more interesting. So then we were 2 people that are thinking about, this could be a cool idea where we help young people in Dubai that are moving to a tax-free country to better their careers, improve, make a decent amount of money, but not save, right? And that's where we started building Sarwa, and became something. I'm not sure if I'm going on a bit of a tangent, Jiro. So, but if you have some time to continue on that. So in terms of the origin, a key moment was, this is where a lot of ups and downs will start when you have that initial idea. So we're like, okay, there's some finance element that we learned at McGill. I did a quick internship where I realized the core elements of portfolio construction, how passive investing is the way to go. So, and if you make it complex, it beats the point. So I knew that I was comfortable with the general finance approach, thanks to McGill. From a design element, from a tech element, even though I wasn't an engineer, I knew that I would build something that I would use. So ultimately, that gives me an unfair advantage, because I'm a customer, and I'm usually a tough customer. So I would want it to be very seamless, very quick, very simple. And at that point, we're like, okay, let's try to see the regulation element. If you want to do something like this, if you want to get licensed, what does that look like? We call the center, and they're like, you need $500,000 to get started. And it was a bummer of it. I still remember this day, which was like, man, I don't have $500,000. Like, this is going to be quite an issue. And then out of luck, they announced an accelerator that said, hey, we're applying for startups that want to solve the Middle East's biggest problems. So like that could qualify as one of the biggest problems. Let's try to submit an application. They said it's only for post-revenue startups. And this is where we were like, you know what, let's fake it. Let's build a website. Let's hire a voice actor, pretend like we're legit. And we hired a voice actor. We did a mock demo, and we winged it. And we pretended we're these 2 like Montrealers that had this thing, and we want to expand into Dubai, and we submitted this application. And the banker, there was on the jury of the accelerators, like bankers from Citibank, Standard Chartered, all types of banks. Turns out they saw right through it from the beginning. But they liked the idea of 2 25-year-olds trying to disrupt the wealth industry. So they gave us a ticket to actually come join the accelerator and get licensed to launch a robo. And at that point, actually, we're like, okay, this thing's becoming legit. I started telling my roommate Jerry about it. And he's like, you have to talk to Jiro. He was my professor at McGill. He would be all in on this. So I invited Jiro. We had a very long discussion on what we're trying to build. And then something, again, magic happened where Jiro, his eyes also popped up. Like, you got accepted to Dubai's first accelerator for FinTech. This is exciting. Like, oh, wow. Okay, Jiro is also bought into this. That's really cool. So then we sort of became 3 people that were looking at Sarwa to become a bigger story. And Jiro really stepped in to help us on the portfolio construction side, an area that we really didn't master at all. And out of so many things that you need to build as a founder, marketing, product, legal, finance, you name it. This was a huge relief for us to know that, okay, we can rely on Jiro to basically help us with that piece that's very quantitative, very data-driven, and that needs to be just right, because that's the core of our product. So, and that was it. That's really the beginning where we moved to Dubai, and got into the accelerator, and one piece of advice before leaving was I had a mentor that was at McKinsey, and he said he did an MBA at I can't remember exactly where, to be honest, but it was one of like an Ivy League school, and he was like, one of the best things that I learned from my MBA was fail fast. And he was telling me about a few friends that launched their things, and it took them a lot of time to fail, and eventually they lost that time where they could have been building something else. So I was like, okay, great, I'm gonna book a two-way ticket, 3 months. Within 3 months, I need to feel like the world there's a bit of a pull to launch Sarwa. So we went in, and that made it a lot easier to start a business. Because I wanted to see my boss, and I told him, hey, I want to take a leave of absence instead of I'm quitting and see you later. And at that point, when we left, we were very difficult. We were like looking for a lot of progress for us to keep going. So instead of saying I'm embarking on a 5-year journey, I'm going for 3 months, and I need to make progress in 3 months. And that's where it changed our mindset. We became much more milestone driven. And this is where getting a license, we put in a lot of work to get a regulatory license. And when we got that license, this is where we're like, okay, that's enough for us to continue for another maybe 6 months this time. Let's extend the time we're going to work on this project. And then from 6 months, we're like, okay, the next step is going to be, can we raise money to hire a team of 10 people? And that like step by step, basically, we started building and building until eventually the story becomes a team of 50 and VCs, and you end up completing all the time and all the blocks as you go along. Yeah. Sorry, I I went on a bit of a story, but just to give a bit of a taste of what it's like in the early days, because we see all these stories around startups, but the fragility and how they build up is an area that I find isn't covered necessarily.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of you guys can imagine this, like when you're trying to start something from nothing, it can be very much a daunting task, right? Because there's so many things to accomplish in order to get to that point where you've actually built something sustainable and that's growing. And so you can even see with the way that Mark talks through things is that he tried to take something daunting and he tried to intelligently break it up into smaller pieces and try also to find ways to like take some of those pieces and not have to overly stress on it, right? So, for instance, as you pointed out, I think kind of like one of my main early roles in Sarwa was to allow you not to have to stress over little fires on the investment product side, and then focus all your efforts on all the other things that needed to be prioritized as well. So you've hinted a little bit to this kind of sequencing of like milestones or prioritization. Maybe you can talk a little bit more concretely about that. Like, what were the things that you prioritized very early on? And then maybe in relationship to that, talk a little bit about building the team, beyond Chad and to some extent myself.
Yeah.
Because I think you picked really well there.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. So it's a very good point. One thing I really prioritized was trust. I realized that I need to have people I really, really trust to be able to move very fast. So sometimes you'll hear contradictory opinions on should you work with friends, should we work with family. I was all in on working with friends actually, because especially if I knew they were talented at what they were doing. So after Jad, we realized very quickly that if we're gonna take all this time to build the product and to go into getting a license, who's in charge of promoting the brand? Who's in charge of getting early customers, developing hype around the launch? So we realized we needed a CMO very quickly. We started talking to a few friends, and we got introduced to Nadine, who was the sister of a very close friend. And we said, do you want to try working with us for a month? Which, again, back to Jiro's point, we want to remove these daunting big decisions of getting a co-founder. So that's when we tested working together for a month. We started working on a wait list, a few press release announcements, a few ads, and we really liked collaborating together. So we're like, okay, this is the trio. We're going to be the three co-founding team. And the focus became really just launching. As simple as it is, but what is an MVP? And you often hear launch with a product that you're really embarrassed about. If you didn't launch with something you're embarrassed about, you launched too late. So then we're like, okay, what is? And it's easier said than done, because when we launched, to fund your account, you had to literally log into your online banking, add a beneficiary. That takes you like a decent 5 to 10 minutes, wait 24 hours, and then you'll be able to log in against your online bank and then send money. It was something that we were like, oh my God, can you believe we're gonna tell people to do this, to invest? and also, like, from someone who's not from the industry, it was like, all right, but how? There's someone in Dubai, they need to own stocks on the US stock market. How does it all tie together? And I need a license to be able to do this. Do I need a license in the US? Do I need a license in Dubai? And you start talking to people and you start telling people, oh no, you can't do what you're doing. Like, this is not going to work. And so you start, one of the challenges becomes, am I completely out of my mind where I just moved from Montreal to try to do this where people are, so you also have to fight the doubt of, the first thing that from a priority is like, can I prove that this is actually possible? Can we actually launch and not get shut down by a government or someone telling you like, are you out of your mind? How could you have done this and break some sort of law? So that's where like we really went on having so many coffee chats. I had like a stack of business cards, obviously pre-COVID, but initially it was just exploration. Like, talk to so many different people around. Hey, I'm trying to do this. Do you have an input? And you get some input that's legit. Some of it that's completely a waste of time. Some of it that's discouraging, actually. But you filter through it, and that's why it's really good to have a co-founder. I really don't encourage you to go at it alone because there's a lot of successful solo founders, but first of all, it's easier to raise money if you're 2 or 3. But also, sometimes you're going through it down and your co-founder isn't. So you sort of pick each other back up. And my co-founder, by the way, as a fun note, he also went to McGill. So a lot of your classmates, don't underestimate the importance of these relationships. A lot of my great friends weren't really Arabs, or I didn't have access to them to tell them, hey, come to Dubai. But in general, now with a more global world where you can be remote, that's a huge opportunity for a strong co-founding team. But yeah, putting that aside, priority was just really figuring out how do we launch, how do we get licensed, in the fastest way possible and get something going.
By the way, kind of, when I was considering, do I join this project? So, as Mark mentioned, one of the things that I put a lot of weight on was precisely the fact that you guys had gotten into the accelerator program, and that the accelerator program was basically a partnership between the local regulator and, organs like international organizations like Accenture. The program was going to be bringing in international talent to the region, where the regulator would be working with these projects to try to basically modernize what was allowed versus what was not. And within the accelerator program, Sarwa was the only robo-advisor that had been admitted. Right, so the first thing you said, my eyes lit up, they might have popped out of my head. But to me that was an unfair advantage, because we would be fast-tracked on getting the licenses necessary to actually launch. In the process of doing it, if we did it the right way, we would have an opportunity to build a strong trust-based relationship with the regulator, which would probably be important for building a trust brand more generally in the region. A little bit of background on financial market participation. in the Middle East, traditionally it's been much lower than North America. We talk about low financial market participation in North America, but it pales in comparison to what you see in the Middle East. So in some sense, part of my mind at least has always been like, we're competing against a portfolio of cash and real estate. So you can think about this, like, now all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, wow, there's like an opportunity here to add a lot of value to people in the region by helping them. It's in some sense like part of it is low-hanging fruit. It's like having you take advantage of the like substantial benefits of participating in financial markets. But the challenge is, if you look at the history of financial services in the Middle East, it's a history where there's been a lot of fly-by-night institutions that come in, sell complex, expensive products in the region. If the products blow up, they leave the country. So there's really low trust. Right? So with really low trust, there's kind of unique challenges that present themselves. And to me, the opportunity with the regulator was really one that could put us in an advantageous position to build that steady, trust-based brand. Another thing that Mark mentioned that I think is important to mention is just like the value of his network, his close friend network, his McGill network. One of the things that I noticed immediately was just how strong your network was and how much people in your network believed in you. So the person that introduced Mark and me, which, as Mark said, is an ex-student of mine from like other VC class. And he, when he told me about you, he was like, look, trust me, like Mark, I've known Mark for years, we live together, like all the personality characteristics are there. And he is actually a person whose judgment I trust with regards to evaluating people. Building more broadly on the McGill network as well, there was another person that I knew that hadn't been my student, but is a McGill grad that I came to know through another channel, Eli, who was an angel and who ended up being an angel investor in the first Friends and Family round. And he also said kind of the same thing. Right? So like the strength of your network, not only did it help you build a team you believed in to really help you kind of have that belief, but I think it also made it easier for you to bring people in because, if they're in your network, like basically it helped me, for instance, not knowing you otherwise, really feel comfortable taking a bet in you and taking a bet in Jad. So I really kind of highlight those two things, and I highlight the fact that you guys really have a precious opportunity here to really build these networks. I'll also mention another thing, which is if you can build the networks beyond just these hotels. Right? Jad was not discipline, he was engineering, right? Correct. So it's the fact that there was a diversity to your network, both in terms of expertise, but also in terms of like different regions. Nadine was not in Montreal. That really helped kind of give this project the momentum it needed early on. Look, in trying to make something manageable, right, one of the things that we've talked about previously is the role of a minimum viable product in MVP, right? An important question to ask with an MVP is this question of a lot of people with an MVP, they emphasize the fact that it can, like you said, that it can suck in many ways. Like, you should almost be embarrassed about it, right? But, like, to me, almost equally important is it's important to know what dimensions in which the MVP absolutely cannot suck. Where it's like so core to your value prop or to the strategic advantage you hope to build that you cannot cut corners. Even though you're constantly stretched thin, you must not cut corners there. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what were dimensions of the MVP that you felt you couldn't cut corners on. Onboarding, yes, it could be painful. But like what was part of that developing, getting yourself to launch, where you're like, you can't drop the ball on that?
Yeah, very good question. On the MVP, I would say the performance, the portfolios themselves had to be spot on. There's no way that we're gonna have people get into certain portfolios that, like, we were gonna make our brand by we were promising people that you're gonna pay less fees, you're gonna overperform compared to all the other ones trying to overcharge you and sell you different products. So that was really a key area we focused super early on, to be like, we need to know what the best people in the industry are doing. And we started talking to Vanguard, to BlackRock, and that's one thing we really didn't jeopardize on to really get the best performance for our customers. And the reason this also ties to the early stage, where as quickly as possible you want to build up your confidence. Because the more you're confident about what you're building and how good your product is, you'll start to tell more people about it in a certain way that you're just dripping from like conviction that people will want to partner with you or give you a ticket. We got our parents actually involved in the angel round, and I'm very grateful we did. So imagine when you also have your parents' money in your business, you have a greater sense of responsibility as well. So all of that starts to breed confidence, and you really don't want to jeopardize on key elements. So that's definitely one of them. Another aspect is, of course, security. We need to make sure that the value chain is spot on. So when it comes to selecting who's going to be our brokerage custodian partner, who's one of the best in the international sphere, we evaluated 2 to 3 firms, and we decided on Interactive Brokers at the time. On Interactive Brokers, and they had a very good brand. And when we weren't a brand, we actually didn't know this back then. We got quite lucky, because when Sarwa wasn't a known brand, they were like, yeah, but they're run on Interactive Brokers, so I'm fine to test and give my money to the startup, because ultimately the backbone is Interactive Brokers. So also that's another thing that we didn't want to compromise on, because we knew this was going to be embedded in our value chain. So we needed to find a really good partner for the next few years for that MVP. I would say these two are the really 2 core areas.
I mean, I think another aspect of a relationship that was really important, going back to what we were saying earlier, was the relationship with the regulator. I mean, that's one of the things that struck me early on, was like, we were not, or actually you guys were not cutting corners when it came to the relationship with the regulator. So like documenting the conversations, and I remember, right, like there was some turnover within the regulatory department, and I remember us talking about this, where we're like, holy cow, it's a good thing we didn't cut corners, documenting everything about this relationship and every agreement that was made, because when there was turnover, if we had been sloppy there, we would have almost had to reset the relationship. And then that advantage of being first to build a relationship would have kind of been lost, right? But I think almost like the turnover may have even helped us, because we were maybe one of the few that had done that well. And so we actually made life easier for the onboarding of the new relationship.
Yeah.
And maybe that fortified, what is now, I think, like really like an extremely deep trust bond with them. People don't usually think of this as part of your product, but that background activity that you do to get yourself certified, that is part of your product, because it's part of the process to get to launch.
Yeah.
So I think,
spot on. And I think that's where, like, obviously there's so many young people here, and having that fresh perspective on a problem is really a blessing, because the regulator was looking at us as like a different breed compared to all the suited up lawyers, compliance consultants, very formal in their approach, submitting like Word documents of 50 pages for a license. I was from consulting, so I would just show up with like 3 slides, and and then like I would tell Jad purposely, like, make sure you bring your hoodie, and I would like we would be careful around our dress code, dress down, so that we have a much more of a human connection, and tell them, hey, this is the problem, and we would open accounts for them while we were beta testing. Tell them, hey, what do you think about the client experience? No one asked them about the client experience when people are typically afraid of the regulator or try to present themselves in a very professional setting. So us actually not knowing the protocol ended up we started building a very good relationship with them. So, and that's why I think you see a lot of young entrepreneurs, because you end up having an edge, and you see that in the art world. Like David Parson, a very popular graphic designer, he did a course on Masterclass. And the core thing about his class is actually that when people try to tell him, what is it that makes your art so good, whether it's campaigns, and he tells them, I don't follow a rule book. I have a blank slate, and I'm not telling you don't follow rule books or read. On the contrary, I read a lot, and I love getting inspired by so many different issues. But initially, early on, now that I think about it, I think a lot of our initial success was just going with our gut and investing a lot in that regulatory relationship that so many dismiss. But we quickly understood if we get that right, then we're going to be able to launch very quickly, differentiate, have an unfair advantage, add additional products down the road, and that's going to be, we're going to turn something that slows you down into a competitive edge after.
So yeah, so eventually we are the first player that gets the regulatory approval to be able to go to market. Maybe from this point on, it's useful to also talk a little bit about some of the unique challenges that Sarwa confronted relative to some of the kind of international equivalents like a Wealth Simple. So like, robo-advisors in other countries, even zero commission trading platforms like a Robinhood, which exists at this time as well. And maybe talk a little bit through how you viewed the go-to-market landscape in the Middle East as different from, say, North America, and how maybe that informed the contrarian approach that we took on especially the early go-to-market.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Like for us, one of the key moments I felt strong validation was when we got licensed. The Dubai government announced that we got licensed. I was like, wow, that's cool. That's a press release. Like, this is a good sign of legitimacy. And I like the feeling of PR. It has a vanity element, but I liked how it positioned Sarwa as a very credible firm. So, okay, this is a cool channel, this whole PR thing, and storytelling and getting the regulation element on it. So we decided, let's test just PR as a channel, where we share stories of proper investing, this person starting to invest, that left over there like a bad saving plan, where they were stuck in it and paying a lot of fees. So from a go-to-market, that's something that we learned early. The other one is we realized that while we do all these changes for tech, we needed to have a way where we engage with customers a lot. So we built a hybrid model. And that's where we hired Danny, that was at UBS and Merrill Lynch before. So again, we wanted to bring like global level expertise into a market that was very sales driven initially, where people call you, try to sell you a plan and get out. So we started to hear the initial feedback was like, is this too good to be true? How come there's no exit fees or transfer fees and all kinds of fees? So we started to build that up and really listen to the market. And a lot of people are appreciating having someone to talk to. We would invite them at the office for coffee. And we really liked that because we would get a lot of feedback on our product. Eventually we realized, okay, let's try to do events. So we started having, like every Wednesday, we would bring pizza and invite people for free to attend events. And initially it was 4 people showed up and it was like, man, we ordered so much pizza. It sucks. But then 4 people started telling their friends and it started to become 50, 60, 70 people per event, and it was quite easy. And And actually, this channel is now a channel we went all in on, because with COVID, we did an event. It was 500 people went on Zoom, and we're like, wow, no catering, nothing. Just a Zoom link and 500 people show up. So until today, now we're really scaling this channel that remained. So from a go-to-market, we actually even reached out to Wealthsimple, and we spoke to Mike Katchen, their CEO, to exchange notes. So another really cool thing about the industry is when you're not competing with someone in the same market, you'll be like, a lot of people share notes on certain things that worked, certain things that didn't work. So for example, we were starting to get interest from banks that were like, hey, what if we position Sarwa to sell to our clients? And I called Mike. He's like, don't do that. Like, I've had so many Canadian banks try to, in the early days, try to tell me to use Wealthsimple for them, and we lost so much time. They're so slow. Really, it's a huge waste of time for a startup. So we were very grateful to also not go down that go-to-market route and dodge that. So it's not just about experimenting; it's also learning from others' lessons. And eventually really focusing, and today it became a mix of referrals, a mix of YouTube ads, Google ads, and continuing to experiment.
And by the way, one thing that I'll emphasize with kind of the things that Mark is mentioning, Mark, like this class, in some sense, one of the main missions of the class is to kind of reflect and think through the habit of learning by conversation. And in some sense, a lot of what you've been describing, all those meetings at cafes, sharing notes with Mike, it highlights like that. This is a lot of how he learned during these stages where he had to figure things out and didn't have the opportunity to figure everything out ahead of time. So I would say, what you see in terms of like the way Mark executed, I think kind of reinforces a little bit the sales pitch of the mission of this class. So I thought I would mention that. Look, the stuff around PR and then the stuff around content, in some sense, one way to think about this is, if I want to kind of like simplify a little bit, is almost everyone considers us a fintech, right? But I think us as a fintech in this space is different from the fintechs in other regions, because in some sense, what I feel that we needed to knock out of the park was not just the tech aspect and the user experience aspect to make it painless and easy to participate in a product, but we also needed to kind of be an education play or a culture play or a trust play, where we needed to fight against one big hurdle that we have in the region, which is the lack of trust and the lack of awareness that you can add a lot of value by participating in financial markets. And so one of the things that I think is a big point of differentiation, I think, between us and a lot of other places, just how much effort we put in to educating our customer, but not over-educating, right? It doesn't work to over-inundate with details and to try to make things technical and blow people away. It doesn't have the desired effect. It actually can start to look like you're trying to trick someone. But keeping it simple and easy to understand, keeping it consistent, right? And not doing things in the product pipeline, especially early on, that cast doubt on that mission and on that philosophy. I think that's one of the things that we've done. If you look at our marketing materials, at all the content that we generate, I think if you compare it to some of the other companies, even companies that we talk to over time, there is this noticeable difference. And it's not to say that they've done it right or we've done it right. It's like the regions are different, and the way you approach this needs to be attuned to the region that you're launching, right? So I thought I would point some of that out. In the context of this go-to-market, are there some other kind of first-order lessons, or maybe even some mistakes that you think are worth pointing out? Maybe not mistakes in go-to-market. It could also be things around funding, things like that.
Mistakes, yeah. So one cool thing about mistakes is it's very much in line with the growth mindset, which is something very popular in startups, whether it's on the product side or on the marketing side. So there's a really good book called Traction, or that's basically what Lean Startup is for marketing. And it's a framework where you have a hypothesis about this channel. There's 19 channels and that you can tap into. And you say, okay, we're going to try this channel. We're going to devote $100, $5,000 to it, or 10 hours to it. And we're going to see what's the output we're going to get from investing this time. And it's really healthy because sometimes I think this is a good channel while my colleague disagrees and no one's right. Ultimately, okay, well, let's test it so that we're not just debating over something that can be tested. So I would say quite a few mistakes in terms of testing this channel that I thought was going to be a game changer and actually really isn't. And sometimes we confuse excitement with importance or with how something is going to be built out. And that's something as a first-time founder you end up toning down because initially each idea you have, you're going, oh my God, this is going to be a game changer. So I think that mindset is something that can be toxic as you scale because it's very distracting where you get an idea and you go to your engineering team, you're like, hey, let's drop whatever you're working, let's try to do this. So it can be, I think that in general, that mindset is something to be careful about. And the sooner you can build an engine around prioritizing experiments, the better. So, and sometimes it's important to run this experiment. So one thing that we were skeptical on is like elevator ads, where in the elevators of like known buildings in Dubai, we had Sarwa, and it was quite expensive. This type of marketing is quite expensive, and especially when we were so early, no one really knew the brand, so it was really useless as a campaign. And we're like, okay, well, let's pause elevator ads. Although we spent quite a bit of money on it in the early days, it felt good to like not wonder what it's like to not tap into this channel. So it's also good to make some investments, at least to clear out this channel and be like, well, no, we tried it, didn't work on this one, let's move on to another channel. So from a go-to-market, I think it's really cool to go through these 19 channels, test a lot. And now today we actually brought back, it took us a few years, but now we brought back, we put a big billboard on the highway, and that actually boosted a lot of the brand, our fundraising efforts, we had our best month this month. So sometimes there's a wrong channel at the wrong time as well. That's really from like a marketing perspective. From a fundraising perspective, it's a whole field to raise funds. I think in the early days, what's more relevant for you as a class is the angel round. So for the angel round, getting a VC is a plus but not a must. In fact, if you do get a VC, you want to make sure it's not a VC that's going to take too much space. So that's one of the lessons we learned early is it's good to have a VC early. We were quite lucky to have one in the first round, but at the same time, it brought a certain level of governance that can slow you down, where you're still trying to figure out so much in terms of culture. So that's one thing we learned actually later, where we're like, wow, we kind of need to draw the line between what does the board do, what does the co-founder, what are some of the things that the board should look at, what are some of the things that board members should not be looking at. Because the same way the startups are a lot of the time young teams, first-time founders, the VCs have that same issue. A lot of VCs are also full of young people it's their first time on a board. They don't really know how to be a board member. So they sometimes overstep, and you need to like course correct that. But that's a lot on the relationship side. I think that you would learn how to manage conflict, how to deal with like when conflict happens. How do you do that in a way that still respects the other person, doesn't jeopardize the business. So that's some of the lessons I would say on venture. like or raising funds.
Yeah, by the way, one of the things that Mark just mentioned in terms of like a VC sometimes being in a position where they don't really know exactly what the best practices are and stuff like that. I would say that was particularly something that could pop up in the Sarwa environment because venture capital was really a burgeoning thing in the region at the same time. Sarwa is really growing with venture capital. Mm-hmm. That's growing from quasi Jiro as well. So a lot of these early investors, didn't have a great depth of experience. And by the way, there's like two ways that you can think about this, right? You can think about this as like, wow, that sucks, right? Like I have to keep dealing with it, right? And you can complain about it and get negative about it. That's not what Mark and Jack did, right? They actually view this as an opportunity. We build a relationship and we grow together. Yeah. And I think that's also been helpful as well. Like
100%.
Look, at the end of the day, a lot of things in private markets, more generally, right, are more relationship-based than things in public markets, right?
Yeah.
And so make sure you understand the human element in this stuff and the nuanced differences in the institutional conditions that you face.
Yeah.
And think of it again, like as an individual, like how do you do this? And it's not like strategic gaming, like I'll manipulate you. No, it's like it's authentic. It's like we all want the same thing. We want to grow this big. We want to generate value even beyond Sarwa for the region in terms of FinTech ecosystem. There's so many interesting conditions, so much potential in the region that like this should be collaborative, right? Mm-hmm. And part of it is the spectacular potential room for growth. But that happens when again, no one's an expert on anything, right? And so you try to like inch yourself, sometimes hopefully as quickly as possible towards getting on the same page and getting things right. Again, like one of the things I love about Mark is that when there's challenges like this that come up, and by the way, tons of them popping up all the time. Like Mark's reaction is to stay very calm, not to kind of react quickly, and really think through like what's the right way to do this, considering many different angles, including human ones, right? So, I think like some startups, like there's this question of like, what are the right founder characteristics for a startup? And the answer is this is not one size fits all, right? And there's some environments where you want someone who's really stable, deliberate, but can still act fast, but not too fast. Like doesn't react on dopamine. Is like very much fueled by endorphins, right? Like that's like almost like a definition. and I feel like that's really helped Sarwa and its mission. Right?
Thank you, Jiro. I appreciate the words. I would say the main the main characteristic is just you at your best and understanding your strength. There's a really popular, there's many like personality strength tests. One that we use at Sarwa is called the Gallup Strength Finder. And it can be a game changer for you, for your career, for your confidence, because I'll give you an example of how it was practical. For me, I'm an introvert, and I saw the fundraising process as quite daunting, because when I look at other founder CEOs, typically very like alpha, sales driven, can tell very public in their approach, where I tend to be more quiet, more deliberative. So when I did that test and I looked at my strength, it was focus, it was deliberative, command, so like looking for challenges, and I crafted my fundraising strategy according to these strengths. So I realized I'm not going to be someone that's going to take out people for coffee and lunch and wine and dine and and do that and go golfing, whatever that is, where a lot of, like, just the stereotype, you'll be surprised how sometimes it holds true. So I realized how can I use focus for the fundraising process? Okay, so I'm going to pick my number one VC that I really want on my board, and that's a very good fit for Sarwa, and I'm going to send them very detailed monthly updates. I'm going to make sure that in general, they're very aware of Sarwa and our efforts, instead of trying to talk to so many different VCs and sell to them. So by doing that, I was much more comfortable with the process as well, because ultimately I realized, okay, if I'm going to win at the fundraising game and land my best VC, it needs to be in line with who I am. I cannot apply someone else's strategy. It needs to be really in line with my strength to give it its best shot. So that's another framework you can use, because all of us are very different in this room, and you can approach it. If you're very positive, then maybe your positivity is going to be your strength, and it's just relaying and giving that energy that is going to get someone super excited about how mission driven you are. There's many forms. There's no one answer. But yeah, I just wanted to add that lens, because we discussed founder characteristics. It's something that I realized I see so many different flavors, and ultimately the best ones are just ones that are true to who they are.
Yeah, I mean, like this aspect of like honest self-awareness, coupled with this idea that like you realize like a startup is not something where like a priori you're fixed to the rules of the game, right? So it's not something where it's like you must play football. You know, there's an aspect of a startup where you can design the game a little bit around your strengths. You can only do that, you know, in a rational way if you really do know yourself. So this process of reflection, and also this process of like direction and like, you know, where are you trying to go in the very long run? What are the actionable things you can do in the short run that are measurable, that give you a clue as to whether you're making progress towards that North Star? Right? So even things like another thing that's impressed me is like the fact that you picked up on some of these really helpful frameworks of thought to kind of govern your short-term actions, your long-term strategy, but also like how you've been sharing it with the rest of the team as the team has been growing. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about that. I almost think of it as like an aspect of leadership, leadership for yourself, but leadership for the team as well.
Yeah.
Maybe talk, you know, any frameworks that have been useful for you and the team there. Because I think some of these things can be useful to people in all walks of life.
Yeah. Definitely. I would say one of the earliest frameworks is very quickly, a lot of you from Rothman will be very data driven, and so you can kind of get a bit lost initially on, okay, well, what is the definition of success? How do I know I'm doing well? I can sell candidates on the mission, I can sell VCs on the story, on this problem, on this product, but I need to be honest with myself and know, how are we doing? And a really cool framework was that we used initially was, are we growing each week by 5%? And what is our most important metric? I just want one metric, and if we're growing this metric by 5% weekly in the early days, that was a blog post by Paul Graham, who has a lot of just really good content in general. And he said startups equals growth. So therefore, if you're growing 5%, you're killing it. You're similar to investing on compound interest. Well, apply it to your business, and you're going to be growing exponentially. So that was a really cool framework that the team really loved, because it allowed us to go from, am I working hard enough? Am I working on the right things? And all these questions that you have initially to, for growing 5%, that was a great week. I'm done. I'm going to have a good weekend. Call it a day. Oh, it didn't grow 5% this week. Well, we need to do some changes. So this framework aligned everyone when we would meet in one room, and we were, let's say, about 10 people, to now, all right, it was an honest measure for us to know how we're doing. So frameworks are really good to just a general direction, and of course, you'll ditch them. Eventually, it becomes you need another framework, and we talked about the growth mindset as a framework, right? Where you start to put experimentation as a really key area. Then maybe it's more difficult to experiment. You want to work on bigger projects. So not being too attached to something is really important as a startup, and that's something we dealt with last year when retail trading was really making a boom and making a comeback. And we faced a bit of an existential question, which was like, are we going to stay in our lane and only be a robo-advisor and tell people just do that? Passive is the way to go. Don't trade. But people are doing it anyway. Or are we going to tap into that and actually fix that, make it more transparent, make it more, make it cheaper or zero commission? And then the sum of all its parts is going to be something much greater than just doing one thing and sort of closing your eyes and ignoring that it's not happening. So that's another aspect of leadership where you sort of see the market, and as Jiro was saying, you talk to people. I love to talk to people in the US because they see what's coming out of Canada and the rest of the world because of just in general how advanced this technology is. So when we were talking to people in the US, they were telling us, oh, well, Wealthfront and Betterment already lost the battle to Robinhood. They're like, wait, what? Like, these are our heroes. What do you mean they lost the battle? So that's where we're like, okay, we're on the wrong path. We really need to course correct and expand our mission. Stay true to who we are, but expand, have additional products. It's going to really allow us to guide people, have more visibility over their portfolios, and come up with an even greater solution. So that's another, like, sometimes you have to take certain decisions, and that's going to be one of your roles as a founder and CEO to lead with not just in the ways of working or target setting, but also the general product strategy.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's useful to kind of unpack this a little bit more because, like, we had real discussions around this within the company at the time because, you know, when we get look, we launched two things. We launched a crypto version of our Invest product, where in addition to the ETF portfolio that we provide to our customers, we give them a small amount of exposure to Bitcoin. By the way, we had internal discussions in 2017 before we launched, when Bitcoin was doing extremely well, and we had this conversation, should we provide an option to offer this? And we decided at the time, given our governing principles, that we absolutely should not. There just was not enough of a historical track record to really, be able to kind of justify from our foundational principles around low-cost diversification and equity market participation to really justify, by the way, so we decided not to. Had we done it, this would have probably killed us, because when we launched Bitcoin in 2018, that would have been deadly for us, right? But last year, we decided to finally offer it. And in addition to that, later on, we launched our zero commission trade product. Two things that if you kind of just look at it momentarily at face value, it sounds like we're backing away from our principles. Right? But we actually, when we thought about it more carefully, we didn't think we were backing away from our principles. Because we realized, well, part of it is what you said. You gotta listen to what your customer wants sometimes. Right? And you need to understand what the default option is. Remember I said cash and real estate? Right? If the default is, if we don't get the customer, it's cash and real estate, even if one thinks, and by the way, it's an open question as to kind of what the data will say. It's too early to tell at this stage. But even if we think not all active investing is ideal, it probably, unless people go bonkers, right? It's probably better than cash flow, right? And so part of it is this realism of like, look, at the end of the day, we're in the business of helping our people, right? And we need to accept the constraints of attention and demand and optimize around that. And just saying like, oh, we're only robo, like, right? That kind of like works in this like weird version of the world that is not the world we live in, where like you can top down say like, oh, listen to us, do this. But that's not the world we live in. And again, like, there's reasons to believe that some investors might actually be low. And we started thinking like, what are some of the other benefits that come from giving people an opportunity to have a bit of exposure in Bitcoin or to trade on their time? Well, you know what? They become more engaged. And if they become more engaged and more empowered, guess what? That's a really good thing. Because there's plenty of people who invest in like a robo portfolio, but they're not engaged. And because they're not engaged, they don't redeposit on a regular basis. They don't do the things that are necessary to develop a sound financial plan. And so there's this like backwards thing where like in a very narrow sense you did the right thing, but in a broader sense you did the wrong thing. Because you didn't help them build the right habits as soon as possible. And we actually truly believe that the products we've launched are totally on our mission because we believe it'll have that positive impact. But it also governs how we market the product and what other things we do around the product. Going back to our content strategy and being really regular and kind of trying to teach these good habits, right? So like, yeah, we've launched products and expanded things and in some sense launched stuff that we wouldn't have launched right away. But at the same time, we do not feel that we've bent at all on our values, right? But it's been about learning, like, what the needs of the market are and how those needs and how the reality is shifting because of global conditions, but also because of the natural evolution of the local market. Is there anything, maybe one more question, and then we'll like open things up to Q&A for students, unless you think there's something important that we've missed. But maybe you can talk a little bit about, beyond Sarwa, kind of like the excitement, the energy, the momentum in the region around startups and around FinTech in particular. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. I think when we started, there was a lot of the first this, first that. Like first FinTech license, first VC that's investing in FinTech. That was 4 years ago. Today, Dubai took a very, very good approach to COVID, actually. And so they managed the crisis really, really well and ended up attracting a lot of people already even in 2020 that were visiting Dubai. And that's one thing Dubai does really well. It portrays itself as like basically a land of opportunity. So a lot of people and expats started moving there to look at it and started seeing how many core problems are missing. Because for example, if you look at FinTech in the US, you have the initial robo-advisors, but then you started to have branches of robo-advisors for women specifically, or robo-advisors for responsible investing. So you have like much more niche products as opposed to like just solving investing, right? In Dubai, you still had an emerging market. You still have like really core missing building blocks. And that's something that's really exciting about emerging markets is the amount of problems you can solve. So that, if you fast forward today, imagine all the effort that founders are putting in to tell their stories, the VCs that initially backed them, that wanted to do them. So this compounding of all of the people trying to pitch startups and fintechs to institutional governments, there's now a lot of money pouring into startups. So last year was like a huge record year for funding in general, including including Dubai as a hub for emerging markets. And it's a very exciting time for that, because it's not just for founders, it's for launching your career in a startup. One thing that I really like about Wealthfront, for example, is they publish every year the 100 recommended startups to apply and work at. And they try to pick startups that are not really seed or even Series A, more and around the Series B, C stage, so that you get some sort of like stability and a team that knows how to work together, but still has a lot of upside as well, so that if you can get equity, it can be a huge payoff financially for you. So that's sort of the vibe as well, that you can ask yourself, that maybe this founder thing isn't for me. In fact, I often deter people from being a founder, because if I keep telling them don't be a founder, and then they still want to do it, then you want to be a founder. But a lot of the other ways could be joining someone's mission and becoming part of the founding team or the early team, or of course VC as well. Although the best VCs I found are actual entrepreneurs, and a lot of actually VC analysts that I know have communicated that to me, where like, I wish I started more in the startup so I could really connect with the founders and understand what it's like to build a business. So yeah, that's a bit of the dynamics I would say about now. Very exciting for sure, and yeah, a lot of buzz.
By the way, I think like there's actually like a pretty solid McGill community in the region as well.
Yeah.
Kind of driving some other exciting stuff as well. Though maybe we won't touch on that this evening. Maybe now we can open up to the fun part, right? We can open it up to student questions. Does anyone? Yusuf.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I haven't worked with a friend or hired a friend unless I knew they were really good. So I didn't face a situation where someone was underperforming that is a friend. So unfortunately I cannot give you practical situation, but I would say definitely if you have any doubt, definitely avoid, or you're not really sure, that could be one of the toughest situations. Like just from having fired people, it's already like an extremely tough situation for someone you barely know. So to do that with a friend can be quite a challenge. So I've argued with friends, or we've come into some tough challenges, that's for sure, and that is expected. And you come out much stronger because you realize sometimes your ego gets in the way, and you both really care. As Jiro was saying, you really both want this to succeed, and you realize sometimes you start bicker about random things. But that's usually in the early days because you're not sleeping enough, you're working too much, and you're stressed. But that's really the initial phase. I think 2 years plus, things really are very different because you're much more confident. You know how to work together. You have a lot more self-reflection. You go through a lot of self-reflection as well throughout this journey. So I wouldn't worry so much about underperformance once you know they're vetted, they've been promoted, they have a track record in their previous employer or wherever, or their grades. Just in general, look for signs of success, and the rest of it is just building a strong relationship.
Brian.
Yeah, so you talk a lot about it's very small. You're dealing with a lot of people outside your scope of expertise, right? Legal, finance, and so on. I have two questions. One, how do you decide which buyers to put out first or which behind? Two, how do you make the decision that something's beyond your scope? You mentioned context.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of putting out five, how do you know it's issue? It's a very good one. They usually come and scream at you, and yeah, you're gonna be late on a few things in general. So a lot of the time you're gonna know that this is something that's resonating here. For example, it could be a dissatisfied employee, and that's gonna voice it. And sometimes you're gonna be like, "Oh, I need to deal with this," but at the same time, I have all of these fires that I'm focused on. So a lot of the time, what's gonna dictate priority is anything customer facing. That will take priority over so many different things. A customer issue, especially in FinTech, right? Like your brand, the trust that you need to build needs to be on point. So anything there should be really, really spot on. And then sometimes, unfortunately, you have to be reactive. Eventually, you build up a muscle. And I asked the same question actually to a partner that was at BCG and at Accenture, and I really liked his answer. He's like, when I asked him, how do you start to detect these fires and mistakes, and he told me, like, he showed me his arm, and he didn't have scars on his arm, but he's like, then you start to remember, this is that one, and you sort of build these scars, and you sort of have this detection mechanism on, like, okay, I can see if I don't deal with this now, how this is gonna go down. So unfortunately, you have to go through a rite of passage of of mistakes as the best way to do that. But in general, you'll have a general good guidance on anything legal, customer. These are the things that will scare you and you'll want to attract or approach very quickly. I can tell you one we dealt with last week that was a super funky one, but we had like 600 people from Poland sign up. They found out about our referral program, and they're like, "Oh, we can make a ton of money by just referring each other." It's an online community of 600 people, and they all submitted applications and referred each other in the same day. And we were like, and initially, like, I laughed. I remember the team told me, "Hey, 600 people signed up," and I'm like, "Okay, cool. So can we talk about this?" And then he's like, "No, Mark, you don't get it. 600 people signed up, and now they're threatening to leave bad reviews if you don't pay them their referral code." I'm like, "God damn it, all right, that's a fire." So now I have to drop everything and then make sure we call their lawyer, and then so that's actually the second question, which is like, I can kind of guess that I can't negotiate with a criminal, but let me see what my lawyer thinks, and then all right, this is way beyond my league. I'm trying to guess what the approach is. So that's when I'll call the lawyer, have a strategy, and then approach it. So, yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea. But in general, you get a good sense of it as you run.
By the way, like, one thing that points out, sometimes these fires, there's no way you could have ever anticipated the fire until it pops up. Other things, a couple of things I would mention as well is that, like, in some situations, in terms of fires, like, look, everyone in a startup is professional. And so it is impossible. It is literally, there's a theorem somewhere that says you cannot, extinguish every fire. It's important that everyone in the organization know that non fires are going to be extinguished pronto. Because, like, when people aren't in that right mindset, by the way, like, I'll openly admit, I kind of had a bit of this issue at the beginning with where, like, I'm kind of used to, like, working in an environment where if I say I have a problem with it, it can solve really bad, right? Or if I feel like I'm not being put in the right environment to, like, always hit the ground. Because especially with me, like, part-time, like, when I'm available, I want to be running, right? And it took me a while to understand, like, that's not the way it works realistically here. Like, Mark's job is not to, like, help me with my fires every moment. Like, if that's my role here, then I'm not useful, right? But, like, being aware of this, and that's probably something that you actually need to manage more and more as Sarwa is growing, because there's more of these situations where it's not an easy, like, we're in the same room, I just turn around and I ask, right? So there's more of these moments where people need to understand, like, their fire is not, like, don't take it personally. Everyone is stretched in. So yeah, around this fire stuff, there's a lot of interesting nuance that, I mean, in some sense, like, me having teach VC growth, I, like, realized, like, actually being a little bit involved in it directly, start to realize a lot more of the nuance in these like simple principles that you say. And it's really easy to be like, theoretically you know it. But when you're feeling it, you kind of take things for like it. Anyway, so to me that's been kind of an interesting as well. Jad.
Thank you much. Talk a bit about the go-to-market. In terms of expanding or scaling up, asking for this, I know a bit about the account, especially with my parents, where they investing or the stock market or it's daunting, I'm never getting into that. How are you approaching that? Are you thinking of acquiring these, let's say, older than millennials, or are the millennials have enough money or big pockets to be able to sustain and scale up on that?
Yeah, great question. It's important. So initially when we started Sarwa, we thought our main segment is going to be 25 to 35. And why? Because we were 25 to 35, most of us. But when we looked at the data, it turns out the 35 to 45 segment was like twice as big. So we just started to, our marketing was very, like, it wasn't age specific. We made it sort of broad on purpose to see how is this going to land. So in the personas, it was different personas. We didn't go after like a millennial focused persona and a brand that could maybe make some people in their 40s and 50s cringe. You know what I mean? But then when we landed and 35 to 45 became our core segment, then we would like double down to understand, okay, well, whatever we do, this needs to be in line with 35 with that segment. And eventually we landed between 25 to 45 is our core. We do attract people in their 50s plus as well, but it's not going to be our core focus. And that was a really important lesson for us actually, because in the early days, sometimes we would have someone with like $1 million or $100,000 to drop, and you're like, wow, hey Jiro, can you design a portfolio specific to this person? So initially, again, back to getting super excited. It's cool because sometimes you design this product and it gives you $100K and you celebrate it, but you also need to think of the opportunity, because I could have spent all that time and engineering time towards something that isn't just used once. So we started eventually to get less and less excited about one-off builds and more about products that serve the same segment and keep building on top of that. So focus becomes really, really important so that you're not, and there's a lot of, that's why we talk about MVP, and just all of that is the same principle of focusing. If you're trying to serve everyone, the brand will look cheaper, the product will be undifferentiated. Eventually you can, and that's where a lot of banks failed actually, right? Like, you don't feel any link to the brand. So a strategy that you have to think about, or a quote I like is like, there's two ways to make money. You're either unbundling or rebundling. And in a lot of the early days, it's a lot about unbundling, which is, I'm going to do one thing really well. I'm just going to do a robo focused for the 25 to 45, and anything that's not that is a bit of a waste of time. That doesn't need to stay true. Now we're on a mission of rebundling, actually. We added Sarwa Invest, Sarwa Trade, crypto, save eventually, and we've shifted our strategy. But initially, I'm a big proponent of unbundling and doing one thing really well, so that you can make a brand for yourself in one product before expanding to other ones.
One thing I'll mention, like, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page here, like, I think we would both agree, like, look, we did things early on that went up. Let me put it this: I never thought I would be constructing an Australian ETF portfolio in my life until like this $3 million account kind of dangling. Look, we talked about like milestones that we have early on. Like, the goal is to grow, 5% per month. Like, you have to sometimes do things that seem a little bit heroic to just make that happen, and that don't scale. So yeah, we couldn't like go and construct a portfolio from the ground up for every single person. That would never scale. But like, when we needed to hit some of those milestones, we would do it. But our hope is that we outgrow it and we get to eventually focus on the things that do scale. But in order to show that traction and show that ability to execute, yeah, sometimes early on you do things that don't scale. In other words, like there are some fires that you take seriously early, but that eventually they're not fires, right? So going back to this fire type analogy, it's useful to think about some of the wrinkles there. Alice, you have a question, and maybe Wilson afterwards. Trying to get to as many folks. So I know this. You'll be next up. That's all right. Yeah, Alice. Go ahead, sorry.
So I understand when Sarwa first started in Dubai, it was, a new thing, no one else was in the market. I'm wondering, have you encountered any head-on really similar competitors? If not, then looking into the future, it's not going to be always for Sarwa, then how are you preparing for that? What are you focusing on?
Yeah.
I understand just saying we made awesome returns every year isn't going to cut it. Someone else could potentially
Yeah.
Thanks, right?
Are you sure you want to say that? Just kidding.
I love it. It's such a good question. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so initially actually very quickly after we started, there was a firm called Wahed Invest that was like a robo focused for Muslims. And they made quite a big PR initially. And it was like with the first time we were like, oh, I wonder how. And then we started having rumors of banks that were launching their robo. So the thing that I realized is that what VCs get worried, weirdly enough, because VCs aren't in the day-to-day, they don't talk to customers. They just see like the PR or the general website of the firm that, oh, this could be threatening. But I think deep down as a founder, you know what's a real threat, or this is a serious competitor or not. So the first sort of wave of competition, we weren't like being arrogant or anything, but we're like Islamic focused investing. Like, we had a lot of Muslim clients and they didn't want Islamic principled investing. They're like, I don't really buy this thing and it's expensive. I don't want to pay extra fees. And we actually piloted also our own Islamic portfolio. It didn't boom. It had a decent NUM in it. So when approached with competition, the first wave wasn't so much too threatening. And another reflex, I actually called Mike again at Wealth Simple, and he told me, yeah, like when the Canadian banks moved into Robo, they went really under the radar because they're so spread across so many different products. Customers won't even notice that they have this. So we're like, okay, well, banks aren't really a big threat. Who could really be a big threat? It's going to be a new entrant. Competition's going to come homegrown, or it might come from Singapore. And that's what happened, actually. Stashaway, a Singaporean robo, came, and this was like, oh, this is serious, because Stashaway was like one of the peers we would look into to see how are they doing certain things. It was like, oh, wow, interesting. That's a decent competitor. So another one was, then you had initial startups that were cropping on the trading side. So I ended up realizing, oh, we're going to have competitors on the robo side, on the trading side. And it could be a bloodbath if we are undifferentiated and counting just on returns. So then we realized, okay, what are one things we do exceptionally well? And we realized, for example, customer support is a key differentiator, and we do WhatsApp support, which a lot of firms will tend to avoid because it's it just needs more processes, more technology. So we're like, all right, let's double down on what we do really well. Customer support, we're going to make it non-scalable. We're going to respond to people within seconds, minutes. When you call us, we're going to say hello. You don't have to click one or two or so many different buttons. So, okay, customer experience. And we need to create our own lane. So this is sort of the current path, which is, I don't want to compete with you on trade. I don't want to compete with you on invest. I'm going to build, and today we're the only app in the Middle East where you can do both invest and trade and crypto that we're launching and improving soon. So we create our own lane, which is a one-stop shop so that your wealth isn't scattered across so many different apps. And by having it in one place, you gain better visibility, better pricing, better relationship management. And then, okay, back on, great, we're not competing anymore. Yes, we have competition, But every time you have competition, instead of trying to compete on price and etc., it's important to sort of it forces you to really recreate your own lane so that you're no longer competing. And then someone again might replicate that, and we need to create our own lane again. So it becomes this exercise of finding something really unique to you.
So it sounds like you're offering an app that does a lot of stuff and great customer service. I bet that goes your cost down. Does that mean you're focusing
Yes.
on a more wealthy segment of customers who can afford this?
Yes and no. It drove our costs up, and we had a board level discussion to be like, hey, remember I told you I wanted to hire X amount of people in customer service? I want to double that. Can we have a board approval to really double down on that? And it was like, it was a hell yes, because, so you're right, it did increase our costs. However, it didn't change our target segment, because the wealth team, we're also now making it much more scalable. So we're focused a bit less on one-on-ones and much more on Instagram events, Zoom events. So every week we're rolling out and talking to hundreds of people across many different events. And again, that's sort of unscalable, and that's something, by being more in business for longer, we know works. We know it builds trust, virality. So it's also, there are learnings that your competitors, it will take them time to catch up. Or sometimes, a lot of the time now, they start copying us, but they just see the surface. They don't know that if we're doing that, how much what are the ways that's going to make it really well. So like an Ask Me Anything. I do Ask Me Anythings almost weekly on Instagram. So you start to see competitors trying to do that, but they'll have the wrong format or the wrong person. So there's an edge from operating as well that you start to develop. And yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit on the dynamic. But in general, you don't want to focus on competition. It can become a very toxic. You need to know what they're up to and not just close a blind eye. But I think it's important, and now this is something we always tell our employees: don't focus too much on competition. Much more on the customers and stay focused on that. Pleasure. Yeah, it's a very good question, because I'm not a fan of target setting in general. And let's say you can tell yourself by year end, I want to have, first year I want to have $10 million. Imagine you end up getting $7 million and being disappointed. But you actually built a business and convinced $7 million worth of investments. So that's why in general I like much more the growth rate, and just you were better than how we were last week and last month. That's why I like this 5% as a milestone and as a way of operating, rather than today I'm much more nuanced, where I still like to set I realize people like to have a stretch goal to meet, but it's very personal. So we don't have like individual goals or milestones. We have company-wide goals. If you don't reach them, we're not going to make a fuss about it. But at least we try to anchor it on what success looks like. And it depends on each stage. I can't give you an answer, but I would say every quarter, one of the most famous frameworks in startups is OKRs. That started at Google, where they started setting objective and key results. So an objective is very qualitative, aspirational, and key results are very quantitative and measurable. So every quarter we put a theme in place as a milestone, and how are the ways that we're going to measure how we reach that. So it's a framework that avoids, eventually the weekly cadence is really good initially, because every week you work on a weekly basis. It drives a lot your prioritization framework not to get lost in projects that are too long and you need results quickly. If you see that you're looking at your growth week on week, month on month, and deciding within Like, is this startup doing this? I need to get in early. So then the initial period, the weekly cadence is great. After a while, you want to switch to a quarterly mindset because why quarterly? It's big enough that you can work on meaningful work so that you're not just stuck in small incremental things, but not too long enough that you're waiting a lot to have the result.
Peter, then Mike, then Maria.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Initially, actually, we wanted to be based in Lebanon because I'm originally Lebanese. Luckily, we didn't because we felt it, honestly. When we started, we had a 200K like seed, and they were like, okay, great, that's enough for us to get things rolling. We didn't need more at that time. But we had a Lebanese VC that's like, hey, do you want maybe $2 million, but you have to be based in Lebanon. And I swear during that meeting, the electricity went off. And I was like, oh, I really don't want, like, I want my wife, I want everything, I want to be just focused. I don't want to have to worry about third world problems and I want just the perfect setup. And that's one thing Dubai offers a lot that, although obviously like Beirut and Lebanon has a lot to offer from a culture, a place to live, etc. Dubai's infrastructure was so strong that immediately I knew that wasn't going to be an option to be based there, and you need to pick a very stable place. So if you're thinking of emerging markets in general, not just the Middle East, you need to think of just the general macro outlook and make sure that's not going to come and hijack your plan. Because imagine you're building a great startup, and on top of it, you have to worry about the macro environment. So that's why I think a lot of Dubai or Saudi are the likely, but GCC in general are likely hubs. How have we helped? We helped a lot of Lebanese in the sense of by being us Lebanese, even though we don't actively focus on the Lebanese market. You as a founder, you'll just reach out to like-minded people, and there's a lot of affinity as well, right? So a lot of Lebanese people start to invest. There's a virality effect. Now the current Lebanon situation doesn't allow for transfers, so there is no way you can solve for that really. We've helped a lot of people before the crisis happened or as it was happening to move their money out of Lebanon. I still think there's a massive, if I wasn't working on Sarwa, I would be fixing that problem actually, to help people. Like there's an overlap between crypto and Lebanon, and it's like a solution waiting to happen because Lebanon's problem comes from centralization corruption. So what crypto offers on the other hand is decentralization, so that's outside of the banking system. So it's like the perfect, well, it's not perfect because it's still very volatile. That hasn't proven itself as a currency, but the devaluation of the Lebanese currency is so huge that now a lot of people are organically going into crypto in Lebanon. So I think it's a massive opportunity. If you want to solve it, let's talk. I'm happy to help. But yeah, that's sort of how problems have. Some problems will come and get you and you feel like you want to do something about them. And I think these are the best problems because this is what's going to make you go through a lot of the initial hurdles and challenges because you really care about solving that.
Thank you very much for being with us tonight. It's really interesting. I think my question is around something you said earlier that's not really interesting kind of counterintuitive. And you said like if you look on your company, you're not kind of embarrassed by the
it's similar to investing, where the best time was yesterday. Like, you want to start as fast as possible. You want to launch as fast as possible, whether it's your first product or your second product. Even if it's not up to par, in general, I'm sure you're talented. Your friends your colleagues are thinking about this day in, day out. It's gonna be a decent solution. So the cool thing about launching earlier is that you put time on your side. So I'll give you an example. Like, for us, when we launch a new product, we just want to get it out because, yes, there are issues. Yes, this graph can look better. This can be improved. But every day we're adding business. We're adding customers. We're getting feedback, and we're not guessing what this thing will look like. So you really put time on your side by launching it. I've never regretted launching something too early, to be honest. So the sooner the better has been, in general, my approach. You'll see some founders saying, yeah, no, like, if it was a disaster, they're going to regret it. But in general, if you think through that's why Jiro's point was really spot on. What are the things you're not going to compromise on? If you answer that very quickly, like, and have a view on that, then you're safe to launch afterwards. But I've seen so many founders trying to come up with the perfect solution, and they lose a lot of credibility with their suppliers. One thing that's very focused on FinTech, for example, is your suppliers. I haven't seen one FinTech that's like owns the full value chain completely from day one. So imagine a lot of your suppliers, you meet them for the initial meeting, and they're like, okay, so Mark, Jad, and Nadine are building a robo in Dubai. That was Interactive Brokers. And then they start to see you get licensed. Man, they're moving quickly. I want a piece of that. Like, I want to work with these people. So also speed becomes a huge differentiator, where now you get the best suppliers. They treat you really well. As opposed to, imagine, we met with Interactive Brokers. We started building, and then 8 months out, we're giving them, we're still working on the license. We're ironing out some features. I swear, there's one competitor that launched, they were ahead of us, actually. And they applied to the same program, and the guy didn't get in. He sent us a better LinkedIn message, being like, you took my spot. Our algorithms are, I wish I had this, but I need to show you this message. And he's like, our algorithms are so much better than yours. We should have got in. And I'm like, you don't get it. It's not about the algorithm. It's about how easy it is. And there's so many other things other than the algorithm. And they launched literally like last year, and they're now running out of money because they missed out on so much. And they have invest trade. They probably have a really good platform. But they were ahead, started building something big, and now they're copying us because they're just so late, and in general, you really want to launch as early as possible.
We'll do 4 more questions. I'll just kind of to Maria, Leah, Joseph, then
Of course, my pleasure. Yeah, very good point. Definitely a lot of tension early on, and a lot of overstepping. I'll give you some examples. Remote work was a fun topic, where a lot of our VCs, they come from banking, private equity, very traditional. So they were quite anti-remote work, and were challenging a bit how we run things. We run things very differently. At Sarwa, there's a lot of trust. There's zero micromanagement. Set your own hours, work from anywhere. Initially, we were very much within that wave. So our initial reflex was like, well, these are smart people. Maybe there's something wrong with us, actually. It took us time to remove that mindset and be like, no, we're comfortable with who we are. We trust our way of working. So we had to sort of put that distinction between what is a board level matter, what is not a board level matter. and it wasn't a smooth process. It was a lot of heated conversation to get there, and that's why, like, a lot of the times, one of these buzzwords that I finally get after a few years is the word governance. And you'll see, maybe it's not thrown around just yet. I'm not sure. Maybe it is. But governance is like, oh God, not governance. Initially, that was my first reflection, which is like, this is how it sounds like, so square and not really in line with how a startup works. Now I actually like this word because it sets up, all right, well, as a board, what are you in charge of? The executive team approval, salaries, overall strategy, and the budget. Let's get these straight. Anything else, complete ownership and accountability for the management team. But yeah, it took us a while to get there because initially it's very blurry. The relationship is very blurry. It's someone that gives you your first check and believed in you early. So it's not as simple as pushing back isn't as easy, you know what I mean? And you look at this person with a lot of respect, and we still do, of course, but it's more about knowing, okay, well, this is an area where I have to step up and stand my ground. This is another area where I should be. There are situations where you should be listening and taking notes, and other ones where you shouldn't. So it's very important early on to know what are some of the things that VCs are going to add value on, but also realizing, well, actually they haven't built a business. They're giving you their money because they haven't built a business and believe that you can do a much better job than others. So these are some of the lessons we learned along the way. Yeah, teamwork, huge skill, because especially in remote and even more relevant today, a lot of how project works, from my memory of it now, it's like, hey, I'm taking this section, you're taking this section, and at some point, initially you're like, you can imagine a more, sometimes you have this idea of teamwork that's much more in sync. But I remember it being much more asynchronous, where like, I'm taking this part, you're taking this part, we come together, we review, we put it together and submit something. And initially I used to feel like that's off. But actually that's quite reflective of the real world, where, hey, I'm owning this, you're owning that, and eventually we're going to sync up on the sum of it and ship the product. So I think in general the teamwork aspect is really good. What else? Finance. Like the finance part I thought was really spot on because, yes, it's true, I'm not necessarily applying a lot of things, but I have a good understanding of valuation, of capital markets. I can know, okay, this is an area that's much more aligned with what Jiro is going to be building on. Or like I also know certain areas on a general level. So the finance knowledge, it gave me good confidence in whether it's talking to customers, talking to VCs, in general, you have a good building a financial model. Even though I wasn't good or didn't like accounting, but in general, it still helped me when I had to build a forecasted income statement for 3 years. Of course, you can use the help of online resources, but you get very good technical skills and some of the softer skills in teamwork. Yeah, I love it. I haven't thought of that, but I would say some experiences I would do again, some not. I would like I would have jumped into the startup ecosystem earlier. Even though instead of banking, asset management, internships, knowing that I was already really interested in entrepreneurship, like I was sort of doing like this, where like going into a field that it really doesn't coincide so well with entrepreneurship. So that being said, then I did consulting. The thing I love about consulting is there's a few things that are true to consulting. I don't think they just reside in consulting. I think they are in other areas, or you can build them on your own. Some of them are, number one, nice slides. It's basic, but nice slides still until today surprises me how their effect goes a long way. It gives you're able to tell a good story. You look very professional, and just forces you to, if you're into history and reading, maybe some of you read *Sapiens*, tells you one of the the thing that makes us the most human and separates us from others is storytelling. So storytelling as a general skill set, you can't invest enough in it, and it's going to help you a lot later. That's very true in consulting. So any opportunity to storytell, really go for it. It can be in marketing, it can be in anything. But storytelling is something I really enjoyed. And the second thing I would say is realizing that the partner or more experienced people are just as equipped as you to solve this problem. Like a mind-blowing moment was when I was with a partner, we were working late, and I was asking him, like, how do you think we're going to deal with this situation? He's like, I actually have no idea. Wait, what do you mean? You're a partner. How do you not have an idea about what we're gonna tell the client? And when I realized that a lot of the people are winging it, that was a breakthrough moment. I was like, wow, there's a lot of winging it and just figuring it out on the spot. So that really increases your risk appetite and your comfort with an ambiguous environment, rather than things needing to be so structured. So, but with what I know now, I would say consulting remains a very nice field and an area to learn. But only beat by very fast-growing startups. Go direct to the sources if you're interested in entrepreneurship.
One thing I've mentioned about winging it is, those things are not always the same. Like I would say winging in good faith.
Of course, yeah.
I think last question, Matt. Right?
Yeah, it's a bit ad hoc. I think we talked a lot about issues happening and mistakes happening and problem solving, and I think all of these are opportunities where you can. The first instinct that comes like, how did this happen? And sort of Jiro was saying, you can sort of fuss about it, or you can use this. One thing I realize about myself is I'm usually calm, even when there's an issue. So people started coming to me because even though they're freaking out about an issue, we're just gonna talk it out and do our best to solve it. So the first instinct was like, okay, realizing that you can be a really good sounding board for others, to come talk to you about their issue, and you're not, especially as a founder and CEO, you're not unapproachable or I can't bring issues to you forward. So that's sort of from an attitude perspective, accepting that these are going to happen. Another cool thing we did, for example, was a part of our trading process was manual. And some people were making trading mistakes that were costing us actually quite a bit of money. And we had this idea, instead of saying, oof, you made a mistake, we got the idea to really normalize making mistakes. So we just opened a Google sheet where we put just different columns, which is mistake number 1, who made it, why it was made, and how it can be prevented. And so people that were making mistakes, and we sort of made the way the format of the Google Sheet ends is like, it ends with how could it have been prevented, and we paired up someone in ops with an engineer, so that the engineer could start saying, okay, well, this is a manual error. This person doesn't want it to do the mistake. There's human error involved. How can I use tech to remove human error? And it completely removed this like daunting and I don't want to fail into, when there's a mistake, we're gonna do something about it. It's normal, and we're gonna use tech for improving things. So there are a lot of opportunities, but I think the main lesson is just accepting that they're gonna happen and turning them into a lesson.
Thank you so much for your time. I think this was an awesome event. By the way, I'm not sure if you noticed, but back there, I'm not sure if you remember this fellow. That's Thierry, the person who introduced us to each other.
That's awesome.
So, thank you so much for being generous with your time, coming to Montreal.
Pleasure. Hopefully it was helpful.
It was really wonderful. We're going to have an opportunity now to kind of brainstorm a little bit about the most interesting things to learn from this session, and maybe even come up with, what we perceive to be kind of important follow-up questions. Come up with, if you don't mind, maybe
Yeah, of course.
your way
Of course.
later. But sincerely hope you and your wife enjoy the rest of your time with family in Montreal. We'll be catching up very soon, I guess. Fingers crossed.
Of course.
But